The evening was quiet in the small town. Most people had gone inside their homes, closing doors and shutting windows as the cold night settled in. But one man, Daniel, was still awake. He sat by the window of his house looking at the empty street. His home was messy and filled with dust, but cleaning was never his habit. That was when he noticed something unusual. A small figure stood near the edge of the road, almost hidden by the shadows of a broken streetlight. At first, he thought it was a lost child, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw the truth. It was not a child, and not even human. It was a young, alien girl, thin and weak, her clothes torn and covered with dirt. She looked tired, as if she had not eaten for days. Daniel felt uneasy. Many people in town had seen aliens before, but most ignored them. Some even feared them. Aliens were outsiders and no one wanted trouble. Yet here she was, standing quietly, her eyes wide and glowing faintly under the dim light. She did not move closer. She only stood there, watching, like a ghost waiting for permission to enter. Daniel opened his door. The cold air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of rain. "Do you need something?" he asked, his voice calm but uncertain. The girl did not answer. She lowered her head, clutching her arms as if trying to protect herself from the world. He sighed. Something in his chest stirred, a feeling he could not push away. He walked a few steps toward her. "Look, I don't know who you are or why you're here, but you look like you need help. I can give you some food, maybe some work too." At that, her eyes lifted. They were not like human eyes. They carried a strange shimmer, a soft light that almost looked like stars hidden deep inside. Still, there was fear in them and confusion. Slowly, she nodded. Daniel thought for a moment. His house was in terrible shape. Dishes piled high, dust on every shelf, laundry scattered everywhere. Maybe this could work both ways. "All right," he said, pointing toward the house. "You can clean. I'll pay you for it. Just a simple deal." The alien girl hesitated, then stepped forward. Her movements were cautious, as if every step might be her last chance to run. When she crossed the threshold into the house, Daniel felt a strange weight in the air, as if something important had just begun. Inside, she looked around carefully. She did not speak a word, but her hands moved with care. She started picking up clothes, wiping surfaces, arranging things in quiet order. Daniel watched her silently. For someone who looked so weak, she worked with surprising focus, almost like she was trained to serve or survive by doing small tasks. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. A part of him still wondered if he had made a mistake. She was a stranger, an alien stranger. What if she caused trouble? What if she brought danger to his door? But then he looked at her again. The girl was too thin, too fragile. She looked more like someone running from pain than someone bringing it. Hours passed quietly. The house slowly began to look cleaner. Dust disappeared, dishes were washed, and even the broken table was wiped as if it still mattered. Daniel almost smiled at the sight. He had not seen his home this way in years. When she finally paused, she glanced at him. For the first time, she seemed ready to speak. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "Thank you." That was all she said. Two simple words, but they carried more weight than he expected. Daniel cleared his throat. "You're welcome. Payment, right? Here." He placed a few bills on the table. She stared at the money like she did not know what to do with it. Slowly, she picked it up and held it close. Night fell deeper. The world outside turned darker, and silence wrapped around the house. Daniel thought she would leave after finishing her work, but she did not move toward the door. Instead, she stood still, her hands shaking slightly. She looked at the floor, then at him, as if she wanted to ask something but did not have the courage. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" he asked carefully. The girl did not answer. Her silence was enough. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to do. Letting her stay could be dangerous, yet sending her away into the cold night felt cruel. He wrestled with the choice, his mind filled with doubt. Finally, he said, "You can rest here for tonight. Just the couch, all right? In the morning you can decide where to go." The alien girl gave a small nod, her eyes shining with relief. She curled up on the couch, wrapping herself in the thin blanket he tossed to her. Daniel turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe slowly. Something felt strange. He had only wanted his house cleaned. Nothing more. Yet here he was, allowing an alien stranger into his home. He could not explain it, but deep inside, he knew this was not just a simple deal. Something larger was waiting, something hidden in the shadows of the night. As Daniel closed the door to his room, a thought lingered in his mind. He had no idea what he had just invited into his life. The morning sun pushed through the curtains, filling the room with pale light. Daniel woke up early, not because he wanted to, but because something felt different in his house. It was too quiet, too still, like the silence was holding its breath. He remembered the strange deal from last night, and the alien girl sleeping on his couch. He stepped into the living room. She was still there. Curled under the blanket, her body looked even smaller in the daylight. For a moment she almost seemed human, but her glowing eyes were unmistakable, faintly shining even as she slept. Daniel hesitated, then walked into the kitchen to make coffee. When the smell drifted through the air, she stirred. Slowly, the girl opened her eyes and sat up, her movements careful, almost defensive. She looked around the room as if she had forgotten where she was, then her gaze settled on Daniel. "You're awake," he said softly, handing her a glass of water. She accepted it with both hands, drinking quickly like someone who had been thirsty for far too long. She whispered a quiet word of thanks, then lowered her eyes again. Daniel studied her closely. She still had not told him her name, not even where she came from. She kept her silence like a shield, as if words could betray her, yet her hands gave her away. Every time she reached for something, they trembled slightly, not from weakness but from fear. He tried to keep the moment calm. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, "are you planning to stay in town, or are you just passing through?" The girl froze. For a second, her eyes widened, and then she shook her head quickly, almost desperately. Daniel frowned. "All right, I won't ask again," he muttered, but the unease in his chest grew stronger. When she finished drinking, she stood and began cleaning again without being asked. She picked up the blanket, folded it neatly, and moved to the kitchen sink where last night's cup still waited. Her movements were quiet, graceful, but there was something strange about them. It was as if every task was not just about cleaning, but survival. She acted like someone who had learned that staying useful was the only way to stay alive. Daniel couldn't look away. Questions spun in his mind. Who had taught her that? What kind of life had forced her into silence? He wanted to ask, but something in her expression told him that answers would not come easily. As the day passed, she worked without complaint. Dust was gone from the corners. The shelves were neatly arranged, and even the floor looked cleaner than it had in years. Daniel had hired her for one night, but now he wondered if sending her away would feel wrong. At one point, he noticed strange marks on her arms when her sleeve slid up. Faint lines, shaped like symbols, ran along her skin. They were not scars from accidents. They looked burned in, deliberate, almost like branding. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whoever had done that wanted her to be marked forever. He asked carefully, "What happened to your arms?" The girl froze, quickly pulling down her sleeve. Her eyes flashed with fear, and she shook her head without speaking. That reaction told him everything. It was not something small, it was something terrible. He let it go, but the image stayed in his mind. This was no ordinary homeless alien. She carried secrets carved into her skin. Later that evening, as the sky darkened again, Daniel sat in the living room while she quietly arranged books on the shelf. He tried once more. "You can trust me. I'm not going to hurt you." For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her glowing eyes were filled with something he couldn't name, pain, fear, maybe hope. Her lips moved slowly, forming words that barely reached his ears. No one can be trusted. Daniel's heart sank. He had heard enough broken voices in his life to recognize the truth in hers. She wasn't just running from hunger or poverty. She was running from people who had destroyed her trust. That night, when he prepared his bed, he noticed the living room light still glowing. The girl had not taken her place on the couch. Curious, he stepped quietly into the room. She was sitting near the window, staring out into the dark street. Her body was tense, like she expected something to appear at any moment. "What are you looking for?" he asked quietly. Her head turned slowly toward him. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "They always find me." Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine. Who was they? What had he brought into his home? The girl lowered her head again, hiding her face in her arms. She did not explain further. Daniel stood there for a long time, uncertain, caught between fear and compassion. He wanted answers, but he also knew pressing her too hard would break the fragile trust forming between them. In the end, he turned off the light and let her sit in the dark. But as he lay in bed later, listening to the silence of the house, her words echoed in his mind. "They always find me." And for the first time, Daniel wondered if opening his door last night had been a mistake, or the start of something far more dangerous than he had imagined. The night returned heavy and silent, pressing down on the house like a weight. Daniel had fallen asleep earlier than usual, though his sleep was not peaceful. His mind kept circling around the girl, her glowing eyes, her scars, her strange words. He told himself he had done enough by giving her food and shelter, but the thought that someone might be hunting her refused to leave him. Sometime after midnight, a sound broke through his uneasy rest. It was faint at first, like the creak of wood under pressure, but then it grew sharper. Daniel sat up, his heart racing. His house was old, and sometimes it groaned at night, but this sound was different. It was deliberate, like footsteps moving in the quiet. He reached for the lamp, then stopped himself. Light would only announce his presence. Instead, he moved quietly out of bed, the floor cold under his feet. He listened. The sound was coming from the living room. Daniel's hand tightened on the doorknob as he pushed it open slowly. The shadows stretched long across the walls, and the faint glow of the streetlight outside fell through the curtains. In that dim light, he saw her. The alien girl was not on the couch where she had promised to sleep. She was on his bed. Curled in the middle, trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her faint glow lit the room in an eerie way, as if the stars themselves had slipped under his roof. Daniel froze. For a moment, anger and confusion battled inside him. Why had she left the couch? Why was she in his room? He almost spoke harshly, but then he noticed her expression. Her face was wet with tears, and her body shook with fear, not with mischief. He stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "What are you doing here?" The girl flinched at his words. She looked up, her glowing eyes wide, and whispered so softly he almost missed it. "Please don't send me back." Daniel blinked. "Back where?" She shook her head violently, pressing her hands against her ears like she could block out memories too painful to face. He knelt down beside the bed, lowering his voice even. "No one's here, you're safe, tell me. What's happening?" For a long moment she said nothing. Only her shallow breaths filled the silence. Then, with a voice broken and fragile, she whispered, "They hunt me. If they find me, I disappear." Daniel felt a chill. The girl was not speaking of hunger or poverty. She was speaking of people, real people, chasing her like prey. He wanted to ask who they were, but before he could, she clutched his sleeve with shaking fingers. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't let them take me." Something inside him shifted. This was no longer a deal, no longer about payment or cleaning. This was about survival. He had stumbled into something far beyond his quiet life, yet he could not ignore her. He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady his own heartbeat. "All right," he said firmly. "You're safe here. No one will take you tonight." The girl's trembling slowed a little, though her eyes still darted toward the window as if she expected shadows to crawl inside at any moment. Daniel followed her gaze. Outside, the street was empty, but the way she stared, it was clear she saw more than he did. Finally, her voice came again, weak but steady. "My name is Lyra." Daniel looked at her with surprise. After all her silence, this was the first time she had offered something of herself. He nodded slowly. "Lyra, I'm Daniel." Her lips formed a small, sad smile, then faded as quickly as it came. "Daniel," she repeated softly, like she was testing the sound of safety in her mouth. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He wanted answers, but he also knew pushing her too hard would only build walls between them again. For now, her trust mattered more than the truth. Lyra lay back against the blanket, her eyes half closed, yet Daniel noticed she did not truly rest. Her body remained tense like a runner waiting for the sound of pursuit. Even in sleep, she looked ready to flee. Hours passed. Daniel stayed awake, listening, his ears tuned to every creak and whisper of the house. Then, near dawn, he heard it again, the sound that had woken him earlier. Footsteps, faint, outside the house this time. He rose silently and moved to the window. There, across the street, a dark figure lingered under the broken streetlight, too far to recognize, too still to be a passerby. The figure remained for a long moment, then vanished into the shadows. Daniel's stomach turned cold. Lyra had not been imagining her fear. Someone was watching. He glanced back at her, sleeping uneasily on his bed, and felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him. He had let her in, and now danger had followed. But it was too late to turn back. Her fate and his were tied together. As the first light of morning touched the horizon, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would not send her away. Whatever hunted her had just stepped into his world, and he would face it. The morning sun could not chase away the feeling of unease. Daniel stood at his window, staring at the empty street where the dark figure had stood only hours ago. His mind replayed the image again and again, a shadow watching, waiting, then slipping away into the night. He clenched his fists. This was no coincidence. Lyra was right. She was being hunted. Behind him, the alien girl sat at the edge of the bed. Her thin hands folded tightly together. Her glowing eyes looked smaller in the daylight, but the fear inside them was just as sharp. She watched Daniel silently, as if waiting for him to speak first. "You weren't lying," he said finally, turning toward her. "Someone was outside last night. Someone was watching the house," her head lowered. "They've been following me for weeks," she whispered. "They don't stop. They never stop." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat across from her. His voice was calm, though his thoughts were storming inside. "You need to tell me who they are. If I'm going to protect you, I need to know what I'm up against." For a moment, Lyra did not answer. Her hands trembled as she pulled back her sleeve. The strange marks on her arm glowed faintly in the dim light. "Do you see these?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I saw them before." "What are they?" "They are not scars," she said, her voice breaking. "They are chains. My people, some of them believe in binding those who are different. They burn these marks into the skin so everyone knows who belongs to them. I was property, Daniel. I was not free." The words struck him harder than he expected. He leaned back, trying to understand. "You mean you were a slave?" Lyra nodded, once her face pale. "They call themselves the enforcers. They take the unwanted, the weak, the ones who cannot fight back. We are sold, used, discarded. I ran. That is why they hunt me." Daniel's chest tightened. He had always heard stories of cruelty beyond Earth, but hearing it from her lips made it real. He looked at the glowing marks again and felt a mix of anger and pity rise inside him. "And now they want you back," he said slowly. "They will not stop until they find me," Lyra whispered. Her eyes shone with tears she tried to hold back. "If they know I am here, they will kill you too." Daniel shook his head firmly. Let them try. I'm not sending you back out there. Her eyes widened in shock. You don't understand. Humans are not their concern. They will crush you without hesitation. Maybe, Daniel said, his voice steady. But this is my house. You came here, and that makes it my fight too. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, Lyra's shoulders shook. She buried her face in her hands, releasing a sob she had been holding for too long. Daniel sat there quietly, not moving closer, but not leaving either. It was the first time she allowed herself to break, and he knew trust was slowly forming, in the cracks of her fear. When she finally lifted her head, her voice was hoarse. Why are you helping me? Daniel did not have an easy answer. He thought of the night he first saw her, thin and starving under the streetlight. He thought of her trembling voice begging not to be sent back. Because you don't deserve what they did to you, he said simply. Because someone has to care. The girl looked at him with wide, shining eyes. For a heartbeat, she seemed younger, almost childlike, stripped of the shadows she carried. But then the fear returned. She stood quickly, moving to the window, and pulling the curtain aside. They will come again, she said. They always search in the daylight, but they strike at night. If you keep me here, you must be ready. Daniel joined her at the window. The street was calm, neighbors going about their lives, unaware of the storm waiting to fall. He exhaled slowly. Then we'll prepare. I don't know what kind of weapons they have, but I won't make it easy for them. Her lips parted, almost like she wanted to argue, but no words came. Deep inside, she seemed torn between warning him away and clinging to his promise. In the end, she stepped back, letting the curtain fall. The rest of the day passed in heavy silence. Daniel worked around the house, checking locks, moving furniture, sharpening old tools that could serve as weapons. Lyra stayed close, watching, sometimes helping in small ways. She spoke little, but every time her eyes met his, he saw the same question hidden there. Was he truly ready for what was coming? When night approached again, the air grew colder and the weight of shadows pressed against the walls. Lyra sat on the couch, hugging her knees, while Daniel placed a chair near the window, his eyes scanning the street. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum echoed. It was faint, like machinery in the sky, but it did not belong to anything human. Daniel felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. They've found me, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel gripped the edge of the chair. The shadows outside deepened, stretching like claws across the street. He knew the peace of his quiet life was over. He had let her in, and now the darkness had come to claim her. But as he looked at her fragile form, glowing faintly in fear, he knew one thing with certainty. He would not let her go. The night grew heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel sat near the window, his eyes fixed on the empty street. Lyra stayed on the couch, her glowing eyes reflecting fear she could not hide. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. Then it came. The low hum again, this time louder, closer, almost vibrating through the walls. Daniel stood quickly, his muscles tense. That's not from around here, he muttered. Lyra's face turned pale. They are here. Daniel rushed to the front door and peered through the small gap. At the far end of the street, strange lights glimmered in the darkness, blue and sharp, moving silently like predators in the night. The shadows twisted as three tall figures stepped into view. Their movements were not human. Each one carried long weapons that pulsed with a faint red glow. They've found you, Daniel whispered, his chest tightening. Lyra grabbed his arm. We have to run. If they see me, they will not stop. Daniel hesitated. His house was the only safe place he had ever known. Running meant stepping into the unknown, yet staying meant death. He glanced at Lyra, small, fragile, trembling, and he knew the choice was already made. Back door, he said firmly. Move. They rushed into the kitchen. Daniel grabbed a heavy wrench from the counter, the only weapon within reach. Lyra followed closely, her glowing marks hidden under her sleeve. When they pushed open the back door, the cold night air rushed in. The alley behind the house was dark and narrow. They slipped into the shadows, moving quickly but carefully. Daniel's heart pounded with every step. He glanced back and saw the blue lights spreading across the street. The hunters were searching, scanning every doorway. "Keep your head down," he whispered. Lyra obeyed, clutching his sleeve as if letting go would mean losing everything. They moved through the maze of alleys, passing fences, old sheds, and broken walls. But the sound followed them. The hum of strange machines, the crackle of weapons charging, the echo of boots too heavy to belong to humans. The hunters were closing in. Suddenly, a beam of red light cut through the darkness, striking the wall beside them. The stone hissed and cracked under the heat. Lyra gasped. Daniel pulled her down, forcing her to crawl behind a pile of scrap metal. "They saw us," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we don't give them a second chance." Another beam slashed across the alley too, close. The hunters were moving fast, their shadows stretching against the walls. Daniel knew hiding wouldn't last. They needed distance, they needed cover. He grabbed Lyra's hand. "On my signal, we run. Don't stop, no matter what." Her glowing eyes locked onto his, filled with fear but also trust. She nodded. "Now," Daniel whispered. They sprinted. The night exploded behind them, beams of red light tearing through trash cans, walls, and wooden fences. Sparks flew, smoke filled the air, but Daniel didn't stop. His grip on Lyra's hand tightened as they weaved through the chaos. At one corner, a hunter stepped out, blocking their path. His tall frame loomed over them, weapon raised. The glowing, red tip pointed straight at Lyra. Daniel acted on instinct. He swung the wrench with all his strength. The metal connected with the weapon, knocking it sideways just as it fired. The beam scorched the ground inches away. Daniel shoved Lyra past the hunter, yelling, "Run!" They broke free, racing down another street. Lyra's breath came fast, but her legs moved with surprising speed. She had been running her whole life, and now she ran again, but this time, she was not alone. Behind them, the hunters gave a chilling sound, half roar, half mechanical growl. Daniel risked a glance back and saw their glowing eyes fixed on the chase. They turned into an abandoned lot filled with broken cars. Daniel pulled Lyra down between two rusted frames. Both of them gasped for breath, their bodies shaking. The night was alive with danger, but for a brief moment they were hidden. Lyra pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes wide. "You shouldn't have done that. Striking them means they will not stop until you're dead." Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead. "They were already planning that. At least now they know I'm not going to make it easy." Her eyes softened, a flicker of respect shining through the fear. She whispered, "You are different." The silence around them was short-lived. The hunters' voices echoed again, closer, sharper. They were sweeping the lot, scanning every shadow. Daniel knew they couldn't stay. "We move again," he said, gripping the wrench tighter. Lyra touched his arm, her voice trembling but steady. "They will follow me forever. If you keep helping me, they will never stop hunting you too." Daniel looked at her, his jaw firm. "Then let them hunt, because I'm not leaving you." Her glowing eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time, she did not argue. She simply nodded, trusting him with her life. The sound of boots drew nearer. The chase was not over. It had only begun. The night stretched on, and the sound of the hunters faded into the distance, though the fear of being caught still clung to the air. Daniel and Lyra moved carefully through the abandoned lot, stepping over broken glass and rusted metal. Every shadow looked dangerous, every sound felt like it carried a warning. Finally, they reached an old storage shed at the edge of town. Its wooden walls were cracked and the roof sagged, but it was shelter. Daniel pushed the door open with his shoulder guiding Lyra inside. Dust swirled in the air and the smell of old wood filled their lungs. It was not safe, but it was hidden. "Rest here," Daniel said, setting down the wrench beside him. "We need to catch our breath." Lyra sank onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. Her glowing eyes dimmed as exhaustion overtook her. For the first time since she had entered his house, Daniel saw how fragile she really was. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Daniel sat across from her, watching quietly. He could see the marks on her arms again. The faint glow of the chains burned into her skin. He remembered her words: property, slave, hunted. The weight of it pressed against his heart. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said gently. "They may follow, but they're not taking you. Not while I'm here." Her head lifted, her eyes meeting his. There was doubt in them, but also something else. Hope, faint and uncertain, yet alive. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk everything for me? You don't even know me." Daniel leaned back, his voice steady. "I don't need to know everything. I saw enough. You were left to suffer. You deserve better. For a long time." She said nothing. Then, slowly, she pulled her sleeve higher, exposing both arms fully. The marks were clearer now, running in jagged lines from her wrists to her elbows. They glowed faintly in the darkness, like chains carved from fire. "These are not just scars," she said, her voice trembling. "They are commands. They remind me I belong to them. Even if I run, they remain. They want me to believe I will never be free." Daniel's jaw tightened. He reached forward, carefully taking her wrist in his hand. She flinched at first, but he held it gently, showing no harm. "These don't define you," he said firmly. "Chains can be broken, and I'll help you break them." Her lips parted, and for a moment, she looked as if she might cry. But no tears came, only a small, fragile smile. "No one has ever said that to me." The silence between them grew softer, less heavy. Outside, the world was still filled with danger, but inside the shed, a fragile bond was taking shape. After a while, Daniel stood and searched the shelves. He found an old blanket, torn but usable, and handed it to her. "Here, keep warm." She accepted it carefully, clutching it around her shoulders. "You are strange," she whispered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Strange? How so?" "You do not treat me like a tool. You do not see me as a burden. You see me as someone." Her voice faltered at the last word, as if the concept was new to her. Daniel smiled faintly. "Because you are someone, and you matter." For the first time, Lyra laughed, a soft, broken sound, but real. The echo of it filled the shed, chasing away the silence. She lowered her head, her voice small but certain. "I trust you." The words hit Daniel harder than he expected. Trust was not something easily given, not after what she had endured. He nodded slowly. "And I won't break that trust." The night deepened outside, and the hum of machines returned faintly in the distance. Daniel moved closer to the door, gripping his wrench. "They're still looking," he muttered. Lyra pulled the blanket tighter. "They will not stop until I am gone. They will burn everything in their path to find me." "Then we'll make sure they don't," Daniel replied. His voice carried a quiet determination, the kind that comes when a man has already made his choice. She looked at him, her eyes shining brighter now, not just with fear, but with belief. In the shadows of the shed, with danger waiting outside, she felt something she had not felt in years: safety. Hours passed slowly. Daniel stayed awake, listening to every sound, while Lyra leaned against the wall, her body finally giving in to sleep. Her breathing softened, steady and calm. Daniel watched her for a long time. She was no longer just a stranger who had cleaned his house. She was someone who needed him, someone who had chosen to trust him when trust was nearly impossible. He felt the weight of that choice, but also the strength of it. When the first light of dawn crept into the shed, Daniel tightened his grip on the wrench. The hunters would not stop. The fight was coming closer with every hour. But now, he was not just protecting his home, he was protecting her. And for the first time, he realized he was no longer alone. The morning sky turned gray, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Daniel stood at the doorway of the shed, gripping the wrench tightly in his hand. He had not slept, and yet his mind was sharper than ever. The sound of the hunters was no longer distant. It was close, crawling through the streets, searching, with cold patience. Behind him, Lyra stirred awake. She blinked against the dim light, her glowing eyes reflecting both fear and trust. "They are near," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. "I know, and this time, they won't. Find us running, this time we stand." Her face paled. "You cannot fight them. Their weapons will cut you down." Daniel turned to her, his jaw set. "Maybe, but I will not let them take you. Not while I breathe." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her head, clutching the blanket tighter. The silence was heavy, but within it lay a bond neither of them could deny. Moments later, the shed rattled as a shadow fell across it. The hunters had arrived. Their boots struck the ground like drums of war, and the hum of their weapons filled the air with dread. Daniel tightened his grip on the wrench, every muscle ready. The door burst open with a crash, splinters flying across the floor. 3 tall figures entered, their glowing red weapons raised. Their faces were hidden behind dark masks, their eyes burning with an unnatural light. Lyra gasped, retreating to the corner. The glow of her scars flared as if reacting to their presence. One of the hunters stepped forward, his voice mechanical and sharp. "Return the marked one. She is property. She belongs to us." Daniel stepped in front of her, his voice strong. "She belongs to no one. Not anymore." The hunter tilted his head, almost amused. "You will die for her." Daniel raised the wrench. "Then I die as a man who stood for what was right." The first strike came fast. A beam of red light sliced across the room, scorching the wall where Daniel had been standing only a heartbeat before. He rolled aside, swinging the wrench upward. The metal smashed against the hunter's arm, sending sparks as the weapon clattered to the floor. Lyra cried out. Another hunter lunged toward her, weapon raised. Without thinking, Daniel threw himself in the way, the beam grazing his shoulder. Pain burned through him, but he did not fall. He struck again, the wrench colliding with the hunter's mask. The glass cracked, and the creature stumbled back with a distorted roar. "Run, Lyra!" Daniel shouted. But she did not run. Instead, she lifted her glowing hands. For the first time, Daniel saw power spark from the chains on her arms. The marks glowed brighter, releasing a wave of light that shook the air. The hunters staggered, shielding their eyes. Her voice rang out, trembling but fierce. "I am not your property. I am not your slave." The power surged again, forcing the hunters back. Daniel stared in shock. The marks that had once been her chains were now weapons of defiance. Seizing the moment, Daniel struck the nearest hunter with all his strength. The wrench connected with the mask, shattering it completely. The figure collapsed, its weapon falling uselessly to the ground. The remaining hunters regrouped, their voices hissing with rage. "She cannot escape. Neither can you." Daniel stood, tall, his chest heaving, his shoulder bleeding, but his spirit unbroken. "You'll have to kill me first." Lyra moved beside him, her eyes glowing like fire. "And you'll have to kill me twice." The hunters advanced, but this time they faced not a frightened girl and a reluctant man. They faced a bond forged in fear and courage, a bond that refused to break. The final clash shook the shed. Beams of light clashed against the glow of Lyra's power, while Daniel fought with desperate strength. The air was filled with sparks, smoke, and the roar of battle. At last, one by one, the hunters fell, stunned, broken, defeated. Silence returned, heavy and final. Daniel dropped the wrench, his arm trembling. His shoulder burned with pain, but he was alive. Lyra fell to her knees, gasping, the glow of her scars fading. Tears streamed down her face, but her lips curved into a fragile smile. "We did it." Daniel knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "No, Lyra. You did it. You broke their chains." Her glowing eyes met his, filled with gratitude, and something deeper. "Not alone," she whispered. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing away the smoke and the dust. The hunters were gone, their power broken, at least for now. The fight was over, but the bond they had forged would last. Daniel helped Lyra to her feet. She leaned against him, weak but alive. For the first time since he had met her, her steps did not tremble with fear. Together, they walked into the rain, leaving behind the broken shadows. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. And in that moment, the human who had once offered a simple deal to a stranger knew his life had changed forever.